Congress this year has had to tackle health care, financial regulation, cap and trade, plus countless other issues, big and small, that ultimately intrude on the freedoms of Americans. But our lawmakers seem to have no plans to address the extension of the Bush tax cuts. Without an act of Congress, we will have the single largest tax hike in American history. And this week, the White House vaguely said it may be addressed later in the year. Wow. With me now is publisher Steve Forbes, Ayn Rand Institute President Yaron Brook, Occidental College political scientist Carolyn Heldman, and my friend and colleague and Fox Business Network stocks editor Elizabeth McDonald. Steve, first to you. Doesn't the government understand the terrors that will be caused in the economy, how much worse things will get to raise taxes in the midst of the worst recession in modern times?
They have no understanding, Judge, that taxes are a price and a burden. You know, tax and income, price you pay for working, tax and profit, price for success. That when you raise the price of those good things, you get less of them. One of the reasons why this recovery has been so slow, given the magnitude of the hit we took, and job creation has continued to be disappointing, is precisely the uncertainty about what's going to happen on taxes, all these regulations. So if your taxes are going to go up, are you going to make a big investment? Are you going to take a chance in opening a new facility? No.
Carolyn, I'm not sure where Carolyn is. Carolyn, wouldn't the tax dollars be more efficiently spent in the hands of investors and entrepreneurs rather than the hands of government bureaucrats?
Well, Judge, I think the bigger issue here is that if the Bush tax cuts are maintained, that means adding about $3.3 trillion to the deficit. So if folks are going to be upset, particularly on the right, about the size of the deficit, then we have to get serious about using both taxes and cuts.
Well, then wouldn't it be better, Carolyn, to cut spending as well as to keep taxes down?
Both are needed. I think both are needed for long-term structural deficit addressment.
You agree with that, Yaron, that taxes should be down and spending should be cut?
Well, spending should be cut. That is the key, I think. We need to slash spending, not just cut them. The deficits that we're seeing are enormous, and of course the unfunded liabilities, nobody's calculating those, and nobody knows what those are going to be, but they're huge. This country, from an actuarial basis, if you did the real accounting like corporate America does it, is bankrupt. We cannot afford to continue spending like we do. And, you know, this is ridiculous that you calculate 3.3 trillion or whatever on the tax cuts. If people are taxed more, they work less. You get less revenue. You don't get more. What you need are tax cuts, and what you need are massive spending cuts.
EMAC, isn't it better for people to have their own money to spend and invest at their own risk rather than the government centrally planning all of this?
Yeah, and if you believe that this is the way to go, then you vote this administration, this Congress back in, because you're going to take about $250 billion out of the upper brackets and out of the American people to put it in the hands of government to do what? To pay for the budgets of, that would cover about the budgets of 12 agencies. But, Judge, the issue here is that the idea that the Bush tax cuts created the deficit is using that old static scoring model that Congress uses that went the way of the typewriter. I mean, the Bush tax cuts added the equivalent of the GDP of about France or 5 Saudi Arabias or 15 Egypt. So, you know, basically what we're seeing is, again, we're seeing what happened with Clinton in 93, the turnover in 94. Right. We didn't see that. You know, people say that was, that you can expect that. You'll hear that from the White House that, you know, this is going to be par for the course. No, we hadn't seen that before until the only time we saw that was under Eisenhower, when you had a turnover like that, where the government, the White House, it was ruled by one party and then loses control of Congress.
Steve, isn't it an inescapable conclusion of history that more prosperity comes about by individual initiative and risk than by central planning? There isn't even an argument to be made to the contrary of that.
Governments don't create wealth. Entrepreneurs, risk takers create wealth, bring about the innovations. And so if government crushes or takes resources that the private sector could use, free markets could use, we all end up the loser. And this idea that if you crush people with taxes, the government collects more money, absolutely false.
Caroline, you don't agree with that, do you?
I don't agree with that at all. I think that there's a place for government and a place for private business, and to say that government somehow doesn't have a role to play in providing a safety net for millions of Americans.
I'll tell you,
this isn't about
Judge, quickly,
Judge,
you know, the White House economic advisors, Christina Romer and Jared Bernstein, have written about this. You do not raise taxes in the middle of a downturn. They saw that happen during the Great Depression. You saw it in 32 and 37. So why is it a good idea now?
Guys, hang around. We'll come back right after the break. What happens when the Chamber of Commerce declares a president anti-business? More with our freedom fighters, Forbes, Heldman, EMAC, and Brook. Stay with us. We're back with our freedom fighters, Steve Forbes, Carolyn Heldman, Elizabeth McDonald, and Yaron Brook. The Chamber of Commerce is now condemning President Obama as anti-business and saying he's destroying jobs. In a letter, the Chamber said, quote, instead of continuing their partnership with the business community and embracing proven ideas for job creation, they vilified industries while embarking on an ill-advised course of government expansion, major tax increases, massive deficits, and job-destroying regulations, unquote. Is the Chamber right, Carolyn Heldman? Do you really want to decrease jobs, increase spending, increase taxes in a recession?
Well, Judge, this is an economic downturn that started in 2007, and I think that the Chamber's analysis is much more of a partisan analysis than something that reflects reality.
But isn't it true?
Obama,
isn't it an accurate analysis, Carolyn?
It is an inaccurate analysis.
No, it is
This
accurate.
administration has not, it's inaccurate. This administration has not caused unemployment, right? This is a result of a liquidity crisis caused by corporate greed and a lack of regulation that started well before this administration.
Thank you. All right, thanks, Carol. Corporate greed and the lack of regulations. What is this administration doing wrong? Why are we still in the recession? Why is unemployment still at 10%?
Well, this administration thinks that somehow government creates economic activity, the government creates jobs, and that is a myth. First of all, this crisis was created by government regulation. This crisis was created by Freddie and Fannie and the Federal Reserve and the enormous amounts of regulations on the on the banking system. And of course, what we're doing as a response, increasing regulation, increasing uncertainty, increasing the size of government, setting ourselves up for the next crisis. These are exactly the things that caused this problem. We're just creating another crisis down the road.
Steve, should we even have Fannie, Freddie, and the Federal Reserve? How many times have you read the Constitution and not seen them in there?
Well, in terms of Freddie and Fannie, they did destroy and distort the housing market. What should be done with those two entities is recapitalize them, since the government loves to spend money these days, break them up into 6 or 8 pieces, privatize them, let them go out in the world. If they succeed, great. If they don't, they don't. But you look at Canada, Judge, they don't have hardly any of these programs to help housing, yet home ownership is the same in Canada as here in the United States. So Fannie and Freddie distort capital allocation, destroy capital. And the Federal Reserve, I'd like to ask Carolyn, could we have had a housing bubble the size we did if the Fed hadn't printed so much money in the early part of the decade?
Heldman.
No, and I would agree with you on that point, Mr. Forbes. We're very much in agreement about what should happen with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as well. But the notion that somehow the government got us into this issue and not the private sector, I mean, 2/3 of Americans know that the financial market was driven by greed, and that's why we're in this. Hang on.
EMAC, didn't the government encourage the private sector? Didn't the government, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, give away 150,000 mortgages without any down payment at all? Wasn't the government behind all of this?
The idea being that to address income inequality in this country, that you do it with affordable housing for everybody, but loans made with very deleteriously lax standards, and that were approved and basically given a pass by the government. And so even in China, you see, for example, 30% down payment requirements,
right,
or in Singapore as well.
Didn't Fannie and Freddie basically say to the banks, make whatever bad loans you want, we'll take them off your books and put the taxpayers on the hook?
Sure, this is what happens, Judge, when politics kicks in. They had accounting scandals in the early part of the decade. Fannie and Freddie, talk about greed, had more million-dollar executives than any private company out there. So in terms of, they decided to show how good they were by going for affordable housing, low-income housing. So they threw the standards out. We know from history, 20% down payment, those mortgages are money good.
No
down payment.
Fannie and Freddie, what they are, politically captive, off-balance sheet hedge funds overseen by the U.S. government.
I want to ask you a big-picture question. Sure. Is the wish for freedom illusory? Will freedom return? Will we ever have a government that stops the central planning and protects individual choices?
Well, we're certainly all working hard in order to achieve that. You know, I think it's a long-term mission. It's going to be hard. I think that the trends are going against us. They're not going with us. But it's a battle that we have to fight, and it's a goal that we have to fight for.
And I think the tide is turning. My home state of New Jersey, Governor Christie comes in, actually cuts the budget, none of this phony stuff, capping property taxes, cutting income tax rates, and it's working. And templates, I think it's going to be the template around the country. And people know this stuff doesn't work.
And he does that with a legislature where each house is controlled by the Democrats by a two-thirds majority. Last word, you're on.
That's right. But if we understand what liberty really means, what the founders really meant with this country, we've got a long way to go in that direction.
Yes, we do. Carolyn Heldman, you're on, Brooke. EMAC, Elizabeth McDonald, Steve Forbes, thanks very much. It's one of the worst things you can say about a person or a group. The Tea Party accused of racism. The response next.